My father wired $14,000 to a woman who was always about to visit. My mother died 3 years ago this past March after a 9-month decline that gave everyone in the family time to say what they needed to say to her, and no time at all to figure out what to say to my father afterward. He was 65 when she died, retired 2 years already from 31 years managing a regional distribution warehouse 2 towns over. And the two of them had done everything together in that retirement. A vegetable garden he still keeps up, a Sunday drive with no particular destination, a shared subscription to the county paper that he kept even after she was gone. Like canceling it would have been its own kind of admission that things had actually changed. He was lonely. Everyone could see that, even the people who didn't want to say it out loud. My sister Paula called him twice a week from 3 states away, precise as a metronome, Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I had him over for dinner most Sundays at my place, and it still wasn't the same as having someone in the house at the end of the day, and none of us were under any illusion that it was. He started going to a grief support group at the community center about 1.5 years in, twice a month, and I remember being relieved when he told me about it, thinking that was the kind of thing that would help. Last February, I sat down with him at his own kitchen table. The same one, same chairs, nothing in that kitchen had changed since I was a teenager, to help him get his taxes together, the way I'd done every year since Mom died, because she'd always been the one who handled their finances, and he'd never had to learn it properly. I had his laptop open to the bank's website, downloading statements month by month into a folder on my own laptop so I could sort them later, mostly on autopilot while he sorted a shoebox of paper receipts across the table for me. When I noticed a transfer from the previous November I didn't recognize, $600, sent through a wire transfer service, to a name I didn't know, no memo. I asked him about it, more out of habit than suspicion. He said, without looking up from the receipts, that it was for a friend of his who'd had some trouble with a phone bill overseas. I said okay, and kept scrolling, because it was one line in 1 month out of 12, and there was no particular reason yet to think it was anything other than exactly what he'd said. It was the second one in December that made me actually stop scrolling and sit back in my chair. Another wire transfer, same recipient name. This time for $1,200, memo line blank again. I asked him again more directly this time, and this time he told me more, that her name was Elena, that they'd met almost 5 months earlier on a dating website for people over 50, that Paula had actually encouraged him to try the previous fall, that she was an American citizen originally from somewhere in the Midwest, who'd spent the last several years working as a contract nurse on short-term medical postings overseas, currently stationed at a clinic in Ghana, and that the $1,200 was to cover a piece of diagnostic equipment that had gotten held at customs and needed a release fee paid before she could get it out to the clinic, where patients were apparently waiting on it. I want to be clear that at the time, I didn't say the word scam out loud. Not yet, not even to myself with any real conviction. I asked reasonable follow-up questions. Had he talked to her on the phone? Had he seen her on video? And he said yes to the phone, that they talked most evenings, sometimes for close to an hour, that she asked about his knee replacement recovery and remembered the names of his golf buddies, and once called him 3 days in a row just to check on him during a bad cold he'd had in October. He said that video calls had been harder because her internet connection where she was stationed was unreliable at best, but that he'd seen dozens of photos of her by then, on a beach, at what she said was a hospital fundraiser, holding a small dog that belonged to a coworker, and that I clearly didn't understand what it was like to actually get to know someone the way he'd come to know her over 5 months of nightly calls, some of them lasting until he fell asleep with the phone still in his hand. I went back through the rest of the statements that same afternoon, going back further to August, sitting at his kitchen table long after he'd gone to bed, the shoebox of receipts pushed to one side, and found 7 more transfers before the 2 I already knew about, $200 first, then $350, then $475, climbing gradually, each one tied to some specific, small, entirely plausible sounding reason. A phone bill that had lapsed, a visa document processing fee, a donation to the clinic she worked at, which he told him she matched herself out of her own contract pay, dollar for dollar. A detail that I think mattered to him more than almost anything else she'd said, because it made her generous rather than needy. 9 transfers in total by the end of December, adding up to just under $4,900, each one small enough on its own that it would never once have shown up as unusual against his retirement income and the savings he and my mother had built over 3 decades, which is, I'd come to understand later from reading about how these things typically work, more or less exactly the design. I brought Paula in on it that same week, on the phone, reading her the totals off a spreadsheet I'd started keeping, and she flew out 10 days later, in January, and the 2 of us sat down with him together at the kitchen table, which in retrospect might have been a mistake. 2 against 1 made it feel like an intervention before either of us had finished a single sentence, and he was defensive almost immediately, arms crossed, chair pushed back slightly from the table the way he used to sit. When Mom brought up something he didn't want to discuss, we laid out the transfers on the table, printed out, all 9 of them dated and totaled at the bottom in Paula's handwriting. He didn't deny a single one of them. He said he knew exactly what it looked like, laid out like that on paper, and that he understood completely why it looked like that to us, but that we hadn't talked to her, we hadn't heard her voice at 11 at night when she called just to say goodnight. We hadn't seen how she'd asked about our mother by name, unprompted, weeks after he'd mentioned her only once in passing back in September. He said Elena had told him herself, more than once, that she knew what these kinds of situations could look like from the outside, and that she never wanted him sending her anything he wasn't fully comfortable with. He said that, to him, was proof she wasn't what we thought, a scammer, he said, leaning forward now, wouldn't tell you to be careful about scammers. Paula asked him directly, flat out, whether he'd ever spoken to her on video, even once. He said no, still, as of that January afternoon, going on 5 months now since they'd first started talking. He said her laptop camera had broken back in October, and she hadn't been able to afford a replacement given everything else going on, which was, he added, quietly, almost like it embarrassed him to say it out loud, kind of the whole point of some of what he'd already sent her. We didn't get anywhere that day. He agreed, mostly just to end the conversation and get us both out of his kitchen, that he'd be more careful going forward, that he'd think twice before sending anything else. 3 weeks later, checking the account again on my own laptop at my own kitchen table, I found a transfer for $2,600, dated the same week as that agreement, memo line reading flight, Accra to home, the largest single amount yet by a wide margin. When I called him about it, his voice had an edge to it I hadn't heard before, somewhere between defensive and genuinely excited. He told me she'd finally saved enough of her own contract pay to book most of a ticket herself, and the $2,600 was to cover the remainder plus what he called an exit processing fee that some countries charge before letting a foreign resident leave, which is, he pointed out, a real thing in some places, under some circumstances, which is part of what made it so hard to argue with in the moment, because it wasn't a claim you could disprove with a single Google search, not cleanly. She'd sent him a photo of a boarding pass that same afternoon, which he showed me on his phone, holding the screen a little too close to my face, proud almost. The flight, according to the boarding pass, was scheduled to land the following Thursday, connecting through a city I'd never heard a direct flight route through before, though I didn't say that part out loud at the time. She didn't arrive that Thursday. When I called him that evening, he told me, in a flatter voice than he'd used all week, that she'd been pulled aside at the departure airport over some discrepancy in her work visa documentation, something that needed another $900 to resolve through an expediting service before she could even attempt to rebook, and that this kind of bureaucratic tangle, he'd read himself somewhere online that same afternoon, apparently wasn't uncommon for contract workers trying to leave that particular country on short notice. By March, I stopped trying to argue the specifics with him because every specific had an answer, And every answer was reasonable enough on its own that arguing it felt like arguing with a wall built one plausible brick at a time. Each brick individually defensible even when the whole wall made no sense. Instead, I asked him a different question. Sitting out on his back porch on a Sunday afternoon in early March, the garden still bare, just the two of us, no printed statements between us this time. What would it actually take, concretely, for him to believe it wasn't real? Not what would convince Paula and me. What would convince him? He thought about it for a long time before he answered. Longer than he usually took to answer anything. Long enough that a neighbor's dog barked twice somewhere down the street before he finally spoke. He said if she asked him for another flight and it also fell through a second time for a genuinely different reason, that would be hard to explain away, even to himself. He said that out loud, to me, on his own, without either of us pushing him toward a specific number or a specific test. And it was the first time in the whole 8 months that I felt like I was talking to my actual father again, instead of to someone defending a position. I want to say that was the turn, the moment things changed, but it wasn't not cleanly, not the way it would be in a story someone made up. In April, she asked for the flight again, a smaller amount this time, $1,800, because she said she'd need to fly through a connecting country now rather than direct, given her visa situation had been adjusted by the local authorities, and my father paid it, 3 days after telling me on that porch what it would take. And then at the end of April, she didn't fly a second time either. This time, she told him, because her clinic contract had been extended unexpectedly by 2 more months due to a staffing shortage nobody had anticipated. And she felt she owed it to the patients there to finish out the term rather than leave them short-staffed. And could he understand that? And of course he could, because it was exactly the kind of thing a real person with a real job and a real conscience might actually say. And he told me as much when I asked, almost apologetically, like he knew how it sounded from where I was standing. I checked the total in early May, going back through all 11 months since that first November transfer. Sitting alone this time at my own kitchen table with a calculator app open next to the spreadsheet. 14 separate wires in total, $14,000 exactly. Give or take the $27 or so in transfer fees that came out on top of most of them individually, which he'd apparently also just been paying without comment the entire time, never once mentioning the fees to me even when he mentioned everything else. I filed a report with the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center in May on his behalf and with his permission, mostly so there'd be an official record somewhere if any of it ever became recoverable, though the caseworker I eventually spoke with on the phone was straightforward with me that recovery in cases like this is rare once funds have moved through several separate wire transfers and likely several intermediary accounts along the way, which appeared from the routing information on the statements to be exactly what had happened here. The recipient name had changed twice over the course of the 14 transfers, each time with a plausible-sounding explanation from Elena about a bank account being frozen unexpectedly or a name change following what she described as a recent marriage of convenience arranged for tax purposes in the country where she was working, a detail that had apparently upset my father at the time more than any of the money had, since it was the first time another man had entered the story at all, even briefly, even explained away within the same conversation. My father knows the report exists. He didn't stop me from filing it, but he also didn't want to be in the room when I filled out the paperwork online. So he sat in the living room with the television on low while I did it at his kitchen table. As of this recording, he and Elena are still in contact. He told Paula that much on one of their regular Tuesday calls a couple weeks ago, mentioned it almost in passing. The way you'd mention a friend was doing fine, though he didn't offer, and she didn't ask whether any more money had gone out since the report was filed in May. I don't check his statements anymore without telling him first. He asked me not to, back in April, not angrily, just tired, in a voice I hadn't heard from him before, and I agreed to it. because by then I'd run out of a version of asking that didn't feel like I was taking something else away from him on top of everything he'd already lost in the last 3 years. He still keeps that boarding pass photo saved on his phone, the one from the flight that never landed. I've seen him pull it up more than once when he thinks no one's looking, not to show anyone, not anymore, just to look at it himself for a second, thumb hovering over the screen, before putting the phone face down on the table and picking his coffee back up like nothing had happened at all.